everybody out there. Welcome to another episode of Civil Rhetoric. I am always your host, Larry Jarrow, here with a new guest today. We have Bruce Alexander. Bruce is actually going to kind of change the pace up a little bit. I know everybody's kind of used to the series being presented in a rather even fashion. However, when we ended up connecting on Reddit, it led me down a little bit of a rabbit hole. Looked into what he does, looked into some of the offerings that he has, and I'd actually like to hear him talk about his company. So I'll jump out of his way, let him talk to you because that's exactly what you guys are here for. Bruce, go ahead and take it away. Introduce yourself and tell everybody what you're up to.
Man, thank you so much. I appreciate the platform. To to start with the short version, my mission is to make the world a safer place for people to show up as themselves. So I do that both through authenticity and identity coaching, and I also have a podcast myself that is called Authentic on Air with Bruce Alexander, where I interview people about their stories and their struggles and triumphs with authenticity and showing up as themselves. Um, it's something that I struggled with pretty severely. I had a lot of trauma in my life, and the accumulated trauma that I went through, and I kept saying, why are people treating me like this? Why is this happening to me? Why am I so unlucky? I started to actually evaluate what had happened, and what was consistently the issue is that I was not showing up as my authentic self. I was trying to be something I wasn't. I was trying to live for someone else. I was trying to do something or be something that I could never be, because that's somebody else's spot. All I could ever really be was me. And whenever I stepped into that, I started to realize that there's power in your story. Um, the uniqueness that I have is something that nobody else can take from me. Nobody else can have that. It's something that only I have, and as long as I'm trying to live someone else's life, even I don't have it. So whenever I started to move more authentically, things started to line up in my life. My connections got deeper. I'd been married for 15 years, but our marriage is on a different level than it had ever been before. I'm a parent of four. I've found more depth and connection with my children, and the responsibility I have there. I started to align my career and trying to do the things that I felt like I was being called to do versus what I'd been told to do by everyone else, what I was supposed to be, or this and that, what my dad thought was best for me, or who I thought the world was telling me to be. And I'd never found any sort of satisfaction or purpose in doing that. And yet I was still bumping my head against it. And I, I was kind of forced into a situation where, I'd been in the fire department for almost 10 years, and I was put into a corner where I was either going to have to like fight a lawsuit for up to 2 years with having being fired on my record, or I just had to leave. And it was at that time where it was really becoming apparent to me that living for myself was the move that I needed to make. So I just decided to go into business and take this life coaching thing seriously and help other people step into their authenticity. And that's been the goal and the purpose ever since.
Man, that's a lot to experience in what seems like and appears to be a short amount of time. So I'm actually a little interested here in terms of maintaining and being your authentic self. That's something I can relate to. Being that I'm from the West Coast, I'm from Los Angeles. When I was younger, and also when there's a little bit more light, you can tell I have fairer skin. And what that kind of led to me was by being somebody who was black with light skin, I was kind of placed in a either I can be myself, which was internally I was a kid that liked to play Magic the Gathering, video games, and read comic books, but I was also into sports. So it came to the point to where it was, do I want to go ahead and be the quote unquote nerd that I feel like I am on the inside, or do I kind of step into that role and pretend to be this jock? And that was kind of like a role I stepped into and I played for quite some time. And then I never found any kind of satisfaction out of playing and existing in that role. It was all pretty much just kind of like punching in for work, and then you
Yeah.
come home, you take the outfit off, you wash your face, and then all of a sudden it's like, okay, now I can be myself for a little bit of time before I have to kind of rinse and repeat the following day. For you, what was it like what was it that you experienced that had you existing outside of your true self and actually on your true path, versus following what the world had kind of laid out for you?
Yeah. So if you know anything about the fire department, I'm sure you've heard it's kind of like high school There's a lot of cliques, that's, or even more, it's more like a fraternity. There's a lot of, there's hazing, and there's a lot of, clicking, and a lot of macho behavior. Like, I'm not a macho dude. Like, I'm not macho. I'm not, for one, I'm not white, and it is a very white dominated field. And if you are a black guy, you're supposed to be, like you said, that athletic person who's like, oh, well, we've got somebody for our basketball team. Well, I'm a chunky, like, I'm not going to say I'm completely unathletic, but it's like, I'm not fast. I'm not agile. I don't look like what they wanted when the black guys who got along well in the fire department, they looked like guys who are going to be in a firefighter calendar. Those are the guys that they want. People who look like me and who their strengths are in their mind. That's not what they wanted. And so I just kept having issue over and over again with people telling me that, I didn't want to work because I was a person who was always trying to find a better way to do something. Like, so I'm ADHD, and that's a big part of my platform, is helping people like unmask and deal with being ADHD in the modern world. For me, that was a major barrier that I didn't realize existed until much later. Um, that that process where I'm like trying to figure out how to do something better while everybody else is just doing what they're told. That was me trying to think outside the box. That was me trying to put my unique thought processes to work. And they just said that I was being lazy. I was trying to avoid work. It was never the case. Um, the other, situation was like, if we didn't exercise and I had questions, I would ask those questions, and they would say, well, why did you do this? And I would go to answer, and they'd say, why are you making excuses? And that's something that I still to this day, I can't wrap my mind around, why somebody asks why you did something if they don't want you to explain it. And that's, it's not something that I can really speak to at this point, but it's something I'm looking into, is that disconnect between people who try to explain behaviors and people who don't want explanations. It's just, there's just two different kinds of people. And the fire department is almost completely made of those people who just want you to do the thing and not talk about why it messed up, and just fix it.
I'd agree. I mean, I wouldn't even say just the fire department. I have friends who are involved in like many different forms of civil service, and typically with them, there is a system that is designed within that organization, and anyone that acts outside of that system, they typically get nailed back down until they end up
Mhm.
going through the board and they're basically removed from the game completely. And that's something that I've kind of personally noticed myself. I'd have to agree with you in terms of being a more cerebral person versus being somebody who is like overly athletic. My major strength was if I and I always laugh about this because when you watch like basketball and like Mark Madsen is the guy that always pops into my head, and he was such a hard worker. He was such all these things, all the typical compliments that you're going to see them giving a white American. Versus
Mhm.
those compliments that they would give a black American. And then for myself, I was very much the Mark Madsen mindset because everyone would assume that I'm like able to jump out of the gym or I'm as
Right.
fast as can be. But the reality of the situation is I would just outthink my opponents, which is exactly, kind of how you described yourself.
Mhm.
And I do find it interesting. Like this actually an effort in essence actually it kind of ties back into the masculinity and femininity and like the definitions that we carry personally as well as what society itself kind of impresses upon us. And hearing your description, it's you were a person that if you were potentially of different ethnic background, a different cultural background, or even placed in a different setting, you would have been allowed to thrive and kind of flourish
Yeah.
as the natural person that you are, which is someone
Mhm.
who's more cerebral, someone who's not necessarily as worried about, oh, I need to run a fast 40 and things of that
Right.
not things of that nature. You want to think of a more efficient way of completing the task, which is also kind of the way that I think about things. I'm not very big on just because everyone else has done it, I should do it too. Like that seems silly to me. It seems like
Same.
the lack of evolution and the opposite of what we are supposed to do as a species.
Mhm.
So for yourself, did you struggle or did you struggle with accepting who you really were and the lifestyle that you had already built for yourself? Because I would take it this was after the age of like 25 when this all occurred for you.
So yeah, I got on the fire department at the age of 28 or 29, and I'd been, at this point, I feel like I'd kind of gathered myself back together. I had been through a whole identity crisis through college, in which, I, being the smart person I thought I was, I got to college, and in the vacuum of having my parents telling me what to do all the time, I didn't know what to do with myself. And so I let other people take control of my life. And I got in with the wrong crowd, got into trouble, got kicked out, and, almost got put in jail for an extended period of time. I was lucky in that sense that I was able to get away with probation and parole. But at that point, I started to really feel like I was nobody and I was never going to amount to anything. I was able to come back from that to a degree in which, you know, I met my wife and she saw enough of me to keep me going until we had kids. And I didn't realize that this was what was happening, that I was just like patching it together and finding something to live for, moment by moment. And then we had kids, and I had like a real purpose that, is something tangible. It was like these kids, like I've got to do better for these kids. So that's what led me to the fire department, was because I'd been living these jobs that were not careers. They were never going to provide for a family long term. So the fire department was something that my father had done, my cousin had done. It was a clear, better life. And my dad had been telling me I needed to do it my entire life. So it was just like I finally just submitted to it and went and did it. And it did give me the step up career wise. It did give me the financial room I needed to breathe to be able to see what I wanted for my life. But it also crushed me and, um, put me in a situation where I had to try to be somebody that I wasn't, because you spend 24 hours with people. The first 7 years I was, or 6 years I was at the fire department, I was at the busiest station in the city, like almost the entire time with the same crew almost completely. And that entire time I didn't get along with those people. There were
Oh,
there were moments in which, like if I got alone with a couple of the younger guys, and it was just like me and one or two of the younger guys, we would, we'd laugh and we'd have a great time, we'd make fun of stuff. But as soon as the older guys, the more traditional guys, the more seasoned guys came around, they would immediately throw me under the bus. Like I was the easy one to throw in front of the oncoming train to make sure nobody else was ever a target to make fun of or anything like that. So that's what happened over and over and over again. And I kept trying to be something that would fit in with them. And
uh,
I never was going to be that.
wow. So was this like was this kind of like a shock to your, I guess even like your masculinity? Like the fact that you're around these guys who are hyper masculine because
Mm,
everything that they do is kind of centered around the traditional masculinity traits of, being active, working out, running into burning buildings, although I
yeah.
know it doesn't happen often, but basically the dangerous stuff.
Oh,
And to not be accepted and to be there for so long and to be around them so closely, so often, do you ever, and you mentioned that it was a little bit like high school before. Do you ever kind of feel like that time and that experience was necessary for you to get to where you are now? Like that was kind of you got the money, but the money isn't worth it because you're sacrificing so much of yourself.
yeah, that's 1000% true. I definitely don't think I would have arrived at this version of myself without that trial by fire. And it was, it was a tough one. And you talk about being, motivated by physical labor and stuff like that. I worked out with these guys daily. We, like you said, we trained together, an hour or two every day. I spent all this time doing everything I could to improve myself. I did an extra workout a day trying to be more like them, because for me, I worked at the station with the best looking guys in the department. And, these guys are, 6'2", 6'3", 205 pounds, zero fat. Like that's like there was three of those guys at all times in that station who were built just like that. And I was, meanwhile, 5'10", 240 at the lowest, up to 300 pounds. I put on a lot of muscle working out with them, and I hated myself. I hated myself because I knew that they were still not going to like me. And and it was a very difficult thing, and it was a shock to my masculinity. It was, I didn't realize that I wasn't, quote unquote, a man. Like, but they told me often that, I wasn't man enough. They told me often that, I was, built like a girl, that, there was so many different ways that they attacked my masculinity, that for one, just being a black man, you often get treatment that does not hold par with treatment of a man, you know, just to start. So there's, there's that, and then on top of that, if you put on a little bit of weight, then you're just, it makes it okay for everybody to speak out loud about their judgments of you, whereas to nobody else got that treatment. It was just
Yeah.
me.
Yeah, it's, you brought up an interesting point, with saying that as a black man, it's almost like there's a plateau you need to clear before you can be considered a man as a black man,
Yeah,
and if you are of another ethnic background, and actually I would probably say for most minorities, they kind of already are assumed or presumed to have that, especially if they're 6'2", especially if they're, cock diesel walking around, like,
yeah,
especially if they have those attributes, that kinda just makes them automatically a man. And if you don't fit in that mold, whether that difference being height, being weight, being skin tone, like there is like a, well, you need to prove yourself to be able to be around us kind of deal going on.
hmm,
And, I imagine you're still in predominantly, non-black spaces, kind of like I am myself, like throughout, just kind of throughout my life. And there is always that kind of air of, man, I need to prove myself. And sometimes I wonder and I think to myself, like, is this something that is actually happening from the people surrounding me? Or is this something that I am internalizing? And either way, it's real to me, and because it's
yeah.
real to me, it's a presented issue that needs to be cleared. So, for yourself in terms of dealing with that, was that something you struggled and dealt with in high school? Because you did mention how it was like being in high school again. Was it kinda
Mhm.
that same, issue?
So it was a little bit different in high school, but it was definitely still an issue. My experience in high school was I was very popular. I literally came second in our popularity contest. Well, I went to Edison and it was called Mr. Edison. So it was like I did well as far as building relationships, but I always got that comment of, well, you don't really count as black, or whenever somebody's talking about, being black, well, not you, you're one of the good ones, or lots of, like, I'm from Oklahoma, so I don't know what it's like in California. In Oklahoma, um, people say some pretty wild shit, and it's very much to the degree that being black is bad to white people. So if I speak of you as being black, that's a bad thing. But if I say you're white, you're one of us, you've been accepted into the tribe. Oh, holy, jubilee! Thank goodness, I'm white. They've accepted me. Not understanding that to me was, as time developed and as I got more of an understanding of myself, it became more and more of a diss, as they're telling me that, my race is not worthy of somebody as smart as I am, as, to have diction like I do, to have an understanding of the English language that I have. It's like that has nothing to do with race. And it was very hard. Yeah. I had a great time though, but until I look back on it, I was like, did I though?
It's a very similar experience for myself. I went to a magnet school, and no one on the teams that I played on even knew I was in the magnet program. So I would just kind of pretend like I wasn't because you're not supposed to be smart. You're not supposed
Yeah.
to be all these other things. The experiences are similar to what in California to what you experienced in Oklahoma, although different. Like I found it to where I kind of was able to assimilate in any group, whether it be like I was in a, and this is going to sound wrong, but this was the fact, like I was in a math class and I had a group of Asians that I hung out with in math class because I hated studying for math and they'd hook me up with answers. And then, maybe it'd be an English class when it was predominantly like, I think I was one of three black students in that class. And this was a humanities magnet that like was like really championing diversity. It's just the availability, it just isn't there.
Yeah.
And then even once the availability is there, it's difficult to fill those spots because academia is just not fairly promoted in the black community that I've experienced. Like I
Mhm.
understand that it's a little different in areas like Atlanta where you have like higher income black communities. But for me, it was never promoted to be like, oh yeah, go get good grades. So
Mhm.
whenever all the other kids were talking about report cards, the kids that I played with, the kids that I hung out with, we were talking about like, oh man, what did Kobe do? So it was just like a very different experience. And I agree, there is still, there's this amount of you need to prove yourself when you're different, and that's whether you're white, black, male, female, and a different group when you go into it and you don't look and act like everyone else. There is a bit of a proving process. It is super unfortunate. It's kind of a part of the human condition, and it's one of the reasons why I myself, and I would assume you as well, um, were not allowed to kind of step into who you actually are versus who you had to pretend or portray to be in order to be accepted by the group.
Yeah, and I'll reframe that just a little bit because I don't think anybody disallowed me from claiming my authentic self. I for one, I didn't realize that that was a thing. Like I was uneducated about that. I didn't realize that me trying so hard to fit in, I was sacrificing myself. Like it was something that was subconscious to me. It was just like you want to fit in, so you do what you need to fit in. And what I realized like much later in life is that I didn't want to fit in. I wanted to be accepted. Like being accepted is not the same as fitting in. You
Agreed.
know, when you're accepted, it's whenever you get to show up as you are and you give people the information and the opportunity to just love you. And that's something that I did not feel until so much late until my late 20s in which at that point there was so much negative trauma built in that it took a lot of self work to get to the point where I could actually accept that love. And that's and not have that conversation of like, well, are they putting these thoughts on me, are they thinking this about me, are they you know that those perceptions, perception is reality, I agree with that, but some of it is real. Some of it does actually happen, but generally if you're able to like if you have a strong foundation in who you are, you're able to look at life through a lens in which you're not automatically putting that on everybody. You just feel it when it's happening. And that's
Agreed.
that's
Agreed.
that unfortunately that's not necessarily better, because then it like whenever you feel that that like subtle racism and you're sure of it, that makes it all the more depressing because you're like, oh, this is definitely really happening in a space where I feel like I should be safe. And that's it's unfortunate, it is unfortunate, but it is part of life. And I think that a big part of what I believe in is being able to navigate those situations without sacrificing yourself, without trying to try to be something that you're not, to appease those people because they don't deserve your appeasement. Like it's
Yeah. I agree with you wholeheartedly. It's interesting having this conversation with you. I'm born and raised in, Los Angeles and the city, the
yeah.
San Fernando Valley, but everyone knows LA. Like, and I'm born and raised in that, and your experience is basically a mirror image of mine. What was it for you that helped you begin to kind of break out of that shell and become a little bit more of your authentic self?
It was actually it was a forced situation. So, um, for a lot of people, like the big change comes on the back of a tragedy. For me, like I had gotten deep into acting outside of my core beliefs and values because I was hiding from myself. Like I didn't really know who I was anymore, so I was doing things just to try to feel okay. And my wife caught me. Like, it was like I was, in the midst of she calls it an affair. Like I didn't physically cheat or anything, but it was definitely in like infidelity. Like it was absolutely like basically like a digital affair. And she caught me, and instead of saying like, "You're out, I'm done with you," she asked, "What is going on?" And I was like, "Oh, I don't. What do you mean?" Like I was ready to put my wall up and to have a knockdown, drag out fight and just defend my behaviors. And instead, she asked me what was wrong, like what am I doing? And it knocked me back. And she, we had a conversation. I told a few lies, and she laid it out for me. She's like, if you care about us, if you care about your family, if you want to be with me, you need to figure some shit out. Like you need to actually do some work on yourself, and you need to like put it all out on the table because I'm done with your lies. Like this is the last time. And I felt it. Like I felt it for sure. Like this is the last fucking time. And so many of the behaviors I had, like the lying and hiding and type stuff I'd done, was because I was afraid of being left by her, of being abandoned. And so it was like, okay, I can keep trying to hide and lie and get caught eventually and then actually lose her, or I can do the work. I can do the work and I can actually start trying to figure out who I am and figure out where these behaviors are coming from and what trauma I've got unresolved in my history that's got me acting like this whenever I'm scared or stressed or whatever. And that moment, like the conversation we had after that, and I just started dumping out like all the stuff that I'd buried deep inside myself in a box, inside of a box, inside of a box. And like I started like telling her all these things that I hadn't talked about in 20 years or more, some of it, like so many of these things. And I'm just like, snot dripping out of my nose, and I'm just like drenched in tears, and she accepted me. She loved me anyways. She's like, "Thank you." Some of it hurt her feelings, some of it was not the most beneficial thing to find out about somebody you've been married to for almost 15 years, but she was just appreciative that she was finally getting the real me. And so that moment was the kicking off point for me to like not do it anymore. Like if I like that was the most it was the first time I'd ever really felt like myself as an adult. Like there was no layers of armor, or like it was a really vulnerable place too. It was like I was really raw, and I could have been very easily hurt really bad because everything was on the surface. But it also felt really, really good because everything was on the surface. There was nothing like that knot that you feel inside your chest from like keeping, those deep dark secrets, or ignoring that feeling that you have all the time and pretending like it's not there. It was gone. It didn't stay gone forever, but it like just that moment of total honesty, it was gone. And then continually, the continued moments of authenticity what have like fed me moving forward. Instead of like trying to get validation from other people, now it's more about speaking my truth. Like those moments, it renews and refreshes me whenever I start to feel awkward in a situation, or I feel like something is like something I want to hide from. I just like speak to it, and I'm just like, man, this situation is making me feel weird because this and this. And instead of making me feel awkward and like scared like it did before, is like, oh, I feel better now. Like it's out there. Like, if you don't want to hang out with me because I said that thing, cool. Like that's on you. Like I just wanted to let you know, like, here's where I'm at. And if I'm acting a little weird, it's because of this. So now if you don't like that, cool. But hopefully you do, and we can keep hanging out or whatever.
That's interesting. So that was the moment that kind of set you off and got you started on the path. What were some tools that you acquired along the way that helped you, basically start building up this self value and self worth?
Man, I did a lot of reading, but it was less books and more articles. Like I just read like a lot of articles. Like I have read some Brene Brown and some Jim Rohn, and but they're both people who
Very good.
speak to this issue. But I still have not read a Brene Brown book. I keep meaning to. Like I'm not a person who loves to read nonfiction, so I'm like, ugh, I needed to read that. And so it's um I like I don't like to sound like I'm like super cocky, but I'm really good at fixing problems myself. Whenever I commit to fixing a problem, like for example, and this is kind of telling on myself, but whenever I was in college, like I picked up a pretty hefty cocaine addiction. Like we were doing it like every multiple times a week. We were doing a lot of drugs. And whenever I left college, like whenever I got kicked out, I left and I still was doing it. Okay, like not nearly as much, but you don't just quit that most times. That's something that I was just like, okay, it's time to stop. And this was once again, it was the first one of those like aha moments I had, was due to my wife saying like, I'm not going to watch you kill yourself. And it was like, oh, I mean, when you put it like that, and then
Yeah.
and instead of like saying like I need to go to the 12-step program, which a lot of people use that and have a lot of success from that. To me, it was just I've found success in really accepting the problem and saying this is a real legit problem, and the real legit solution is facing it, being honest with it, and then being genuine. Like I have found that being genuine has really solved most of my problems. Just embracing myself and like loving myself for where I'm at. It's like right now you're a total fuck up. You're messing up again. You're doing this and that, but you've spoken to it now. Like once I put words to it, okay, I'm being a total fuck up. That's not who I am. That's not what my purpose is in this life. So then I just start to like move that way, and it lines up.
I agree with you, and one thing I wanna throw out there, because I assume this is a feeling that a lot of people have and a lot of people encounter on a day-to-day basis, and I wanna let everybody out there know that happens to watch this, you are not a fuck up, and when I say you, I mean each individual personally. You may be a fuck up at that time, but that doesn't mean that you have to be married to it. That's something that you
Yeah,
can will yourself out of.
yeah.
For myself, it was finding stoicism and accepting that into my life. And it sounds like with the people that you've read articles on, especially Jim Rohn. I love Jim Rohn. He's really, really good. And every time I mention him, everyone thinks I'm talking about the sportscaster.
Yeah.
They're like, Jim Rohn? No, no, Jim Rohn, Rohn. He's great. You should read his stuff. It'll get you motivated, especially with me being in sales. So now, once you began that path, was it something that your wife was able to see immediately? Was it something your children were able to see? Like, how did that affect your relationship?
I think it's it's a little different with very intimate relationships because they got to see the most of who I actually was most of the time anyways. It's so my wife, we've had, a few arguments about this. She's like, "You say that you've changed so much and I don't see it." Like because like there have been setbacks in which, like Instagram can be a trigger for me sometimes. Like I'll find myself like scrolling Instagram and like looking at chicks that I don't need to be doing, and I'll like leave my phone open or something and she'll see it and she'll be like, there you go again. I'm like, no, that's not the same thing, but it definitely comes off as the same thing because she's not in my mind. She does, she can't feel the change that I feel in myself. So it further reinforces in me that I have to move more like my intention speaks. It's like I can't walk on the fence of that anymore. It's like I have to move farther away from those types of actions if I want to be perceived by her as a faithful husband. Like it's like her perception matters. It matters a lot. And so as much as I want to convince myself, it's like, well, I'm not doing anything wrong, blah blah. I can talk until I'm blue in the face about that. But what matters to me is her loving me and her wanting to spend time with me and wanting to be around me. And if I'm doing stuff and I'm trying to convince her that my wandering eyes are okay, she's not going to want to do that. So instead I have to just take ownership of the fact that it's like, okay, yes, you've improved, but it's not enough. Like you have to keep growing, you have to keep evolving. It's never like the process is never over. And especially with, in a marriage, it becomes more and more important to like actually show those differences. You have to like put them on active display or else, you can seem very much the same. But as far as other relationships go, like outside of the home, yeah, I feel like it's been pretty clear because for one, a lot of those relationships that didn't support who I am, they're gone. Like, a lot of people don't like whenever you start setting healthy boundaries. They push back against it, and whenever they don't see the result, they find that you're not a pushover anymore. They don't want to be around you because that's what they were there for. They wanted somebody to push around. Unfortunately for me, that's been a couple of close family members. Like I haven't spoken to my mom in over a year, and me and my dad are currently on the outs, and that like it's really hard. But at the same time, it's also been really hard trying to live for them and do the things that they've constantly been telling me that I need to do and how I need to live my life. Like I'm almost 40 years old. There is really no need for a parent to be telling an adult like me what I need to be doing with my life and getting upset whenever I don't listen. Like my dad is really worried that I'm going to ruin my life. It's like, Dad, I'm married and I have 4 kids and I love my life. It's too late. I can't ruin it now. Like I'm already living a great
Yeah.
life. I can't ruin it. So, and he's really, you need to get back into this kind of career. And, I know you left the fire department, but it's not too late to get back into safety. There's good money in the oil fields. And I'm like, it's not because his entire existence has been about making money. Whenever I was, a kid, he worked at the fire department on 24-hour shifts, and then on his days off, he'd work driving an ambulance for 12-hour shifts. So he was not there, and he was okay with that because he provided for us financially. And to me, that's not good enough. Like I want to provide financially, of course, like it's important, but at the same time, I also want to provide a father for my children, like a person who's actually there. So,
I agree with you 100%. I'm a new father myself. I have a 3-month-old, and we're about the
Congratulations,
same age. Thank you. We're about the same age. I'm 38 or 39. I gotta do the math. But,
man.
yeah, and I'm literally struggling with that myself because I didn't wanna be a father to who was just basically a paycheck. I actually want to be a part of my child's life. I wanna see him, have these milestones versus me getting a video of it or hearing about it when I got home or yeah, that just sounded like a really terrible existence to me,
Yeah.
and I do have to admit, like, I was very money motivated in my earlier stages in life, and I got to a point I remember with my wife my now wife, who was at that time my girlfriend, I was sitting on the staircase because we had bought a townhouse, and I was just thinking like, "Man, I have a bunch of money, I have a good job, and I'm just so unhappy."
Mm,
Like, I'm just sitting here and I'm just so unhappy. It's like none of this actually matters or means anything, and I had, like, a real existential crisis, and it took work, it took therapy, it took finding myself and accepting myself before I was actually able to kind of get out of that funk, so I can completely relate to that. Now, how did it go from you starting the journey to becoming a life coach and developing your company?
so yeah, I started the journey of like really accepting myself probably maybe a year and a half or so. Like, okay, let me rephrase it. It was probably 10 to 15 years ago that the journey actually started. That was the moment in which I told you my wife told me like I'm not going to watch you kill yourself. That was the first seed of that growth. It was like, okay, I do love myself. I don't want myself to die. So that was the first time I started to think about myself in any aspect of like you need to be there for yourself. And so that was that first action. And then fast forward to the fire department, which didn't apply that same thought to like my career, to the way people treated me in daily life. It was just like to, not smoking crack or doing drugs. It's like you have to love yourself enough not to do that. And like that was obvious. But as I started to get through this process of going through the fire department, I eventually like I the tests were like, sorry, the promotional tests were not popularity contests. Thank goodness. They were like it was skills and knowledge based. So I was able to pass those and I promoted again and I got out of the field. So I was a public educator and a community risk reduction officer. And in doing that, like I left that extremely stress-filled situation where I was just like under the microscope all the time because I was living with these guys for 24 hours to a place where I did still work with firefighters. I still did have some of that pressure, like it still existed, but there was so much less to where now I had a financial uh, foundation to where I was no longer worried about where our next paycheck was going to come from and how we were going to eat our next meal. And then I had enough space to think about like what was actually important to me because I wasn't getting literally like traumatized every day by the people I was working with. So I started to look at what was what was important to me. I had a meeting with my boss about 2 years ago or so in which he asked me like what's going on with you, and I'm like, what do you mean? And he's like, there's just something off with you. And I was like, "What does that mean?" Because as far as I was concerned, our job was to go out and give public education to the community, and I also had the added job of running our 501(c)(3) and putting on an event. Like I got to do that. I enjoyed doing it, and I was really good at it. And as far as I was concerned, I was crushing these goals. And he would agree. He's like, "Yeah, you're doing great at those things." But whenever you are around here with the guys, there's just something off. You're not, you aren't clicking with these guys, like whatever. I didn't realize at the time that this is whenever I started to go into my ADHD research and realize that the way that I function and the way that I communicate doesn't always translate the way that I mean it to. And so, and whenever there's that like little subtlety about, just the way neurotypical minds work, I don't pick it up. Like I just don't get it. And so there's like little things I was missing in the day to day. Like I was more concerned about working than having like uh water cooler talk. Like I just put my headphones on and blocked them out so I could get work done because that's what I was there to do. and that didn't go over super well. That was a problem, and I didn't really understand it. And on top of that, there was that conflict between my wife and I, in which there was, you know, there was some stress there that I was coming to work and I was just trying to pretend like there was nothing wrong. Like I was just like I'd show up to work and I was like I put on a brave face and I would just do the job and focus and I will never know if this was part of it to him, but to me that was part of it is that I wasn't being honest about how I was struggling with the work life balance. Like that was something that I wasn't talking about, and I did struggle with it for one because I fucking hated my job. Like I didn't like the people that I was with, and like let me rephrase that because I didn't hate the actual work. I hated going to work and working with those people. Whenever I got to go out in the field and do the actual work, I loved it and I was really good at it. But actually being employed by the government was a soul crushing experience that I did not enjoy. So that was like those two things of like kind of hiding and then also just not really telling, giving people the information to make informed decisions. Like I don't think I was ever going to really thrive at the fire department, but I think in retrospect, if I had been able to be better at giving people the information they need to make the decisions that they're going to have to make, I would have had a more fruitful experience there. Like I don't really think I ever had a conversation with my boss just about being ADHD. Like that's something that I think would have been valuable for him to know. Whenever I did have struggles at home, I didn't talk to him about them. I just he said like my door's always open, and to me it was what I heard that was like don't burden me. Like don't be a burden. And that's so I always took that on and just try like I once again I tried to think what they wanted and be that. And I was like, he doesn't want to be a burden, so I need to be not a burden. So I need to make sure I do everything myself. I need to not ask for help. I need to do blah blah blah. And once again, I'm spinning this false narrative because I'm just not communicating. And that's where I like have to take accountability because I don't think that the fire department just out and out did me wrong. I think that there was a mismatch of skills and communication and all kinds of things that could have been worked through. It would have never been a fully fruitful relationship for either of us, but it would have been good enough. And thank God I didn't because I needed to get out of there because it was crushing my soul. So, anyways, that conversation of something's wrong made me start to do some introspective thinking is like, what is he talking about? And like, I started to look at my ADHD stuff and I did research and like, I found out that, the executive functioning is a thing that I didn't really know anything about, like knowing information up here and doing the actual act of that information back here. Sometimes there's a block. And I experienced that often and I didn't know that was part of ADHD. Understanding that was like a big thing for me and it was a big key in unlocking the fact that trying to be somebody else was never working for me because I didn't even understand who they were. I don't get those people because my mind doesn't work like them and it never will. So whenever I was trying to pretend to be them, it came across as false and disingenuous. So that was the thing that I mean, this is once again just guessing. That was the thing that he was saying is like something's just off with you. I was like, I think I'm doing a great job of pretending to be one of you normal people. Like,
It's a lot like when you see an AI image or you hear an AI conversation to where it's like it's there and it's English,
yeah,
but there's something it's missing the subtleties, it's missing the nuances that come
yes.
with the humanity of it, and that's something I can unfortunately or fortunately relate to 100%, especially when it comes to, like, emotional intelligence, like, that's something I
Mhm,
still don't possess. I've done a little bit of looking into myself, and it would seem that I'm on some type of potential spectrum, because processing emotions are something I've never been able to do, aside from anger, because that was the only one that I was allowed to learn how to use effectively. And
mhm,
throughout time, like to where I'm at now, I literally had to deal with previous traumas. A book that I always plug called The Body Keeps the Score. It's an amazing book, and it talks about war trauma and like people dealing with that. And me understanding that that's something that I was personally dealing with myself, although I have never served. I just grew up in a very, very rough neighborhood, and I I'm assuming some of the experiences are very similar in a way.
And there's also just the trauma of being black in America. Like,
Yes.
especially being a black man, that does come with its own specific trauma that anybody else can try to write off, but it exists and it is part of who we are and what we have to deal with as we, try to assimilate into this world.
Agreed. I'm even going to harken back to something you had mentioned earlier, when you had discussed in terms of being black in the world, having the world kind of look at you in a way, and then you having to prove one way or the other. That in itself is like this weight that is just
Mhm.
kind of always there. It's like anytime you go in a room, anytime you're on a video call with someone, even before the beginning of our meeting, I've seen pictures of you. I know you're also black. So I'm like, oh man, I wonder if he's going to be surprised that I'm black. Because I didn't know what information he did. And it's like, I always think that like when I talk to people on the phone and then I meet them in person, it's like, my name's Larry. My middle name is Todd. Like
Yeah.
nothing about there is giving you like super black vibes.
My
And I
name is
always look for
Bruce,
that
by the
shot.
way.
Yeah,
So I
I know you can
understand.
relate. I know you can relate. Bruce Alexander. That is
Yeah.
very like you're not expecting you or
My
someone like
middle
myself
my
walking
middle
into
name
the
is
room.
Wayne also, so that doesn't help either.
You're
Like,
Bruce Wayne Alexander.
yeah, like the
That's awesome.
prototypical white dude, rich white dude, which I'm also not rich, so that doesn't help either. Uh,
Agreed. Same here. So for yourself then, when you started, is it authenticity or authentic?
the business or the business is authentic identity management.
Okay. And
Yeah.
then the mindset.
The mindset is like I coach authenticity and identity. Like that's my coaching, but I actually my mindset that I ascribe to people is the authentic mindset or the authentic philosophy, and it is all about what we've been talking about. It is so much more than just saying like this is who I am. Get used to it. It's much more about self awareness, learning your strengths and weakness, and how to present those in a way that they are going to help people make informed decisions on how to communicate with you. Like for example, you talked about possibly being on the spectrum somewhere. I would encourage somebody who's in that place to do a little more research, to push a little harder, to try to find out for sure, because that information can largely inform how I communicate with somebody. Because if I know that you have trouble processing emotion, whenever I'm telling you a sad story that something, this bad thing happened to me and you're not giving me the emotion back, instead of me thinking this dude's an asshole, I think, oh, he's not feeling the emotion of this, and it's not because he doesn't care. He just literally isn't feeling it, and I'm not going to hold that against you. As opposed to if I didn't know that, I may be like, I don't want to talk to this guy. He's an asshole. He doesn't care about me. And so it's a matter of just having that information to be able to give it to people that you want to have a deeper connection with, and then let them make the decision for themselves, whether they want to. It's a continued back and forth. It's like, here's information. Okay, I accept that information. Here's some information, and it should be like continued, instead of like so much of the relationships I had in the past where I'm going to hide information and give you enough of something. It's not me. Like, I'm not giving you me. Like, I'm going to try to give you enough laughter. I'm going to try to give you enough of a performance. I'm going to try to be dynamic enough to try to win you over somehow to want to be in the same room with me again. Like, what kind of life is that to fucking lead? It's exhausting. They're like,
Extremely.
yeah, trying to put on a show for everybody to try to I want to not be alone all the time. So I'm just going to continue acting in a way that I think that people like, so I'll keep not being alone. As opposed to finding your people, like, and this is something that I found myself, is that whenever you're alignment with who you actually are, you start to move in places where people who are like you also move, and you say, hey, I'm ADHD. Hey, I'm ADHD too, because you're giving the information up front and you're finding common ground early on, and you're like, somebody you may not have thought was going to be a friend with you, you're going to find things early on that you have in common that you don't have in common with anybody else. And then you're going to say, maybe we should hang out. Like, maybe we should just see if we vibe. And then you hang out. And because of the things that you have in common, you do vibe. And it turns out this person that you never would have hung out with before is your best friend. Like,
No, I'm 100% in step with you. That was something I had to do, especially for like the people that I choose to actually maintain relationships with. I was bad on, keeping in contact. I was very bad at, the communicating of emotions. So much so that I basically created a character within myself that was able to take the information, take the emotional language, run it through my logic processor, and then have me react in kind, which in itself made the situation to me even, more removed because it was something that I was just basically trying to get through versus being empathetic.
Yeah.
And I allowed myself, that freedom to say, you know what? This is something you struggle with. That's okay. If you do need to process emotion through logic, go ahead and do so, but let the person know. Like,
Yeah,
because if someone's
absolutely.
going to be willing to open up to me, they also need to understand what they're opening up to. And that was something that I got to. It's interesting how through self work, and I've kind of noticed this through like motivational speakers, through life coaches, through kind of that whole, not industry, because industry has such a negative connotation,
Right.
but industry for want of a better term, there is a message that's extremely similar. The message is know thyself.
Hmm.
And I find it such a struggle because you look outside, and now with living as authentically as I can, or authentically as I am now, I notice when other people are being phony, or not even phony or fake. They're not doing it on purpose. They're just doing it because they think they have to,
Hmm.
and they can't communicate with you or even themselves honestly. And I do feel like that's an unfortunate issue for them. And I do hope that they go out and get some actual help. So when you're working with someone, what is the approach? Is it more of a one-on-one basis? Is it in a group setting? How does what you present, you know, move forward?
So the services I offer, like there are more than one. So it's like I do one-on-one coaching. Part of the one-on-one coaching packages, depending on which package you choose, there is a group aspect to it. I haven't had enough clients to have that group part like actually happen yet, but I think it's something that will be very powerful as I start to move forward. Is that people hearing multiple people say, "Yep, I get that," is a powerful thing. Just like knowing that you're not alone as you're trying to find out who you are is like powerful in itself. But also like I do workshops, like I've got an authentic leadership workshop in which I talk about leading with your heart versus trying to do things that you think are supposed to be done by leaders, like because every leader should be different based on who they are versus trying to do like these are the things a leader does. No, a leader does what the team needs at the time the team needs it, and they're open to the different members of the team and how they can help. Like I think that is a very valuable thought process that a lot of people ignore. So that's and I also like authentic parenting and authentic relationship workshops are both things I offer, but it's one on one is generally the goal is to try to just help as many people with deep work and embracing their authentic self is the main priority through coaching, and then helping as many people as possible through the podcast by just having really genuine authentic conversations and opening up for other people to hear those and heal.
I think that's going to be a very big boon for just society as a whole. It's actually a main reason why I decided to even enter the podcast game because I was someone who just didn't really exist online. I had a LinkedIn, but you had to have a LinkedIn for work. And
Yeah.
outside of that, I mean, I had no social media presence because I just did not see it as worth my time. But having my child has kind of led me to wanting to venture into this industry because I do believe that each person individually can have an effect on the world and make it a little bit of a better place when they check out versus when they checked in. And that's actually a goal for me. For you, ultimately, let's imagine 5, 10 years from now. Where do you want to be, both personally, both within your family, as and also just professionally? Like, where would you want to be? What route would you want to be on?
So my is to be getting 500,000 downloads a month on my podcast, reaching a huge audience and helping them just hear authenticity. And to me, just being able to hear those authentic conversations is a huge step into the world being a safer place to show up as yourself. Like that is, that's I feel like the biggest way I can make a broad change, even if it's just on a superficial level, but I feel like it's a broad change that is towards the right direction. And then I'd like to be, somewhere. like, somewhere between like 15 and 20 clients that I see monthly, and, building that business up to where I'm able to offer more and different services, and really, do like classes and workshops to a larger scale where I'm able to do deeper work with more people at one time. And then just, I'm able to provide for my family while doing it, but I'm also doing important work that I'm passionate about. Like that's the goal.
I think that's a good goal to have. I know for myself it would be something very similar. Now, this actually does kind of tie in back to masculinity as well as femininity. And for a second, I'd like to focus on masculinity with you, even though I know we're getting up on time. When it
I
comes to
I got as long as
masculinity,
you need, man.
okay, fine, then we can rock. We can rock. So for myself, I always find it interesting because when you Google masculinity or men's health or anything along those lines, because I do feel that men are underserved in society, and you run into the manosphere, the red pill, the black pill, the purple pill, all these different people who are taking and helping and coaching young men, but the direction that they're taking these men to, it's a very toxic direction because they're not allowed to exist in themselves. You mentioned that you were able to cry in front of your wife,
Hmm.
and for anyone else out there, or not anyone else out there, but for someone on that spectrum of thinking, they're gonna say, "Well, she's now gonna lose desire for you. She's now gonna lose respect for you. She can no longer see you as the leader, as the quote unquote alpha male," which is a term, or a high value man, another term that likes to get tossed around. And I know for myself, that was kind of the mindset I had when my wife and I first started dating, and just being with someone and allowing someone to get close to you, they're going to see you cry. As a matter of fact,
Yeah.
they have to see you cry because it's dangerous if you don't. Like, you're bottling it up and you're putting it somewhere, like that box
Yeah.
within a box within a box you mentioned. And what did you find? Was that the first time that you found yourself that you were able to cry in front of your wife? And the very
No.
first time, what was that release like?
It definitely wasn't the first time that I cried in front of my wife. It was the probably the most real, guttural and genuine crying that I'd ever had, because there was so much behind it. There was, just so many different things that were involved in that little cry session. But before that, like, I'd cried many different times with my wife because I love her. Like, and when you love somebody and you are vulnerable to them, there are gonna be times whenever you don't see eye to eye and it's gonna hurt. Like, and whenever you don't see eye to eye and it hurts and you're trying to, you're putting in the work to move through those things, if it doesn't hurt, then I don't feel like you're actually putting it all out there. Like there, or you don't have the capacity to put it all out there, because there are people who don't, and that's a whole different issue. But for me, I knew that if I wanted to actually start growing with my wife, I had to be vulnerable. I had to like really talk about the real stuff. And I had to not just, you know, talk about what she's doing wrong, and not accept any criticism back my way, which I definitely still find myself getting into that pattern. But I push back really strongly against the idea that it's feminine to cry. Like, everybody was born with tear ducts, male or female or other or whatever. Everybody's got tear ducts for a reason, because tears are they're natural. It's like it's a God given like ability to be able to cry, and it's something that if it didn't make you feel better, we wouldn't do it. But if crying is a release, and when you don't do it, it makes you feel like you said, bottled up. And so, I definitely try my best to let my children see me cry in appropriate situations. Like, sometimes I cry over like really silly stuff in Disney movies, and I don't want them to see me cry at that moment. It's like, that is really lame. Like, it has nothing to do with being male or female. It's like, that is just, God, dad's being lame, and I don't want them to think I'm lame. Like, if there's anybody who can bring out my disingenuous self, it's my kids, because it's like they're the only people I care about if they think I'm cool. It's like, so so it's like, if my kids like are if I'm afraid they're gonna think I'm cool, I might do something that's like not super authentic, but then I'll be like, no, that's not it. Like, I want them to be comfortable being themselves too. So I have to, like, push myself to do that as well. Um you'd ask something more gender specific, and I'm trying to remember what it was, because I definitely want to chime in on the gender aspect of it, because I think that there's so much weight. You're just talking about coaching. That's what it was, and there's so much weight being put on male or female. Like, there's a lot of podcasts that are women centered or men centered. Like, everybody has problems, and I think it's important to realize that some people are going to be able to service or are going to be able to address some problems better than others, and it might be a man, it might be a woman. That's fine, but there's so much importance being put on gender these days. Whenever, like, I feel like wrapping people up in this like envelope term is missing the point of a person. It's like there's a person there who has their own feelings. They've got their own, different reactions. They've got their own experiences, and those things are gonna, even if every person was built at the beginning of one of these two different things, exact man, exact female, or exact woman, they're, by the time they get through all the experiences and the different locations, the different amounts of socioeconomic diversity, all these different things, they're going to be different people, even if they started at the exact same. So why are we treating everybody like there's an answer that belongs to all men and all women? It's ridiculous.
Yeah, it's funny, and you have that industry like that. I feel comfortable calling an industry because it's creating echo chambers and that false dichotomy of either or, and you're this tribe versus that tribe.
Hmm.
And unfortunately, it seems like that's what sells. But that's one thing that I'm not willing to sacrifice of myself, and it sounds like that's something you're not willing to sacrifice
No,
either. And I really appreciate that. I think someone that preaches and produces a message like the message that you're presenting is beneficial for the world, because you're not saying, you need to make ten or $13,000 a month for you to be considered a man, or to be
no,
high value, or to be low value, or to be any value. You're actually prescribing something that's a little bit more akin to mental health, and helping somebody find themselves so that they can find their place in this world and their place in this life. Um, what is it that motivates you to continue pushing forward and doing this?
well, first, but before I answer that, I want to say everybody has value. Anybody who says that you need to do this, or that to have value is full of shit.
Yep.
Like, everybody has value, and I think that anything like being sold anything different is you're buying a pack like snake oil. So don't buy into that. You are worthy of love just as you are, and you should be comfortable embracing yourself. And if you want to grow, if you want to be something different or better than what you are right now, I think the first step is being able to accept yourself as you are and saying, I'm good enough now, but I'm good enough because I'm good enough. I want to get better. And that's something I just wanted to throw out there, because it really pisses me off for the idea that somebody can tell people's like, you're not valuable enough at this point to be considered an alpha male. Like, whatever. So what continues to drive me forward is, for one, trying to step into my purpose. Like, that is the one thing I've never had before that I'm feeling now, as I've been building this business, as I've been, doing my podcast, and as things have started to like kind of play out. I've never felt more like divinely affected than I have in this situation. It's like I'll reach out to somebody that I'm like, they're never gonna, want to do this podcast. And they'll call back and be like, that sounds like a great idea. And I was like, what? Or like I'll have some idea. And I was like, that's crazy, but I believe it's right. And I'll do it, and things will just kind of work out for it to fall into place. And it feels like I'm stepping into my purpose. And that's one of the main things that helps me keep going. Another one is like creating a more authentic world for my children to exist in. I I am a person who, like we talked about earlier, has had so many different expectations put on me that at one point I completely lost who I am and who I wanted to be. I don't want my kids to ever have to face that. They're both, like all of my kids are biracial. They're going to have to deal with aspects of being black and mixed and all of that already. I want them to understand and have a role model of somebody who says they can think whatever they want about me. I know who I am, and I'm going to keep showing up as me. And so that's, that's one of the main things.
I think that's a reason to continue pushing even when you don't want to.
Mhm.
That again, that's a reason why I'm here as well. Being able to push forward, being able to provide just a little bit of a brighter future for my child. My child's biracial as well, or I guess technically legally not considered biracial because my wife is Mexican. But yeah, it's funny. Like in the
Yeah.
books, in the legal books, you're only considered biracial if it's with a white counterpart. And that's still in the books, which I find is
Oh my
exceptionally
God.
interesting.
I had a
Yeah.
conversation with my father-in-law the other day, and he was trying to tell me that I was overstating institutional racism. And that right there, the fact that it's still written on the books that if you have mixed in with white blood, now you're biracial. Because
Yeah.
otherwise, we don't consider any of those other races enough to stand on their own. Like that's an institutional racism that is very obvious, and it's maddening. Whew.
Oh, of course. It's funny, it's that, it's the flesh color Band-Aid, it's, you can select white or other, it's all of those things, and that's why
Yeah.
for me, I struggle at times when it comes to having to classify myself as Black or having to classify anyone as Asian or anything like that, because I find that you're classifying that person, but it doesn't necessarily happen to, white Americans. With white
Mhm.
Americans, a lot of times they're just assumed as American. So you call them American. But if you're talking
Mhm.
about a black person, it's like, well, I'm a black American, I'm a brown
Mhm.
American, I'm a yellow American.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
it's a rough thing, but it's what I've come to accept is that the society as a whole is going to have its perceptions about me because I'm black. Like it's something that I can't take off. It's something that I have to wear. So as far as that's concerned, I'm not gonna hide from that. Instead, I'm gonna be proud of being black, and I'm gonna talk about being black because they already are talking about all the negative things that being black is. I'm gonna talk about the positive things about it. I'm gonna show that it doesn't look one way.
yeah,
Like I am at least one other example of how being black can look. And because am proudly talking about being black, I do have conversations like, well, if you want to say that, it's like, well, no, I am black. Like if I never spoke to you, you would say I was black. But as soon as I speak and I become deemed worthy in your books, you decide that I'm not. Like that's like, you guys came up with this whole race thing, and now whenever we start to overcome it, you decide that well you're just one of us now. Like it's a very frustrating thing. I do love white people. Don't get me wrong,
yeah,
but
same here.
they have confusing rules.
Yeah, it's the he speaks so well, which was when we were younger, like, that was the
Mm,
thing, it's like, "But he speaks so well, I can't believe it." And for
mm,
me, I've always kinda taken that as, like, a little bit of a jab and a stab, but I understand it's just from having a different existence in this life. These are just things that you're allowed to be blind to, so they are blind to them. And until
well,
someone's actually able to present the information to them, it's like, okay, well, now I see this. And then it's a choice on them. And then it's a choice on you if you want to continue, being around that person despite, their belief system. So I,
and
I I
something
find that
something
interesting.
something I want to like also clarify is like yes, I've heard that a lot from white people, but I've also heard it from black people
Oh, of
that
course.
that's you're not one of us because you talk white, which is that to me is just more depressing because it's like so you can't be black and sound smart. Like that's a really depressing thought. Think about what you're saying. Like you can be smart. It's okay. We'll love you just the same. Come on, like do some education. It's all right.
Yeah. I find it within black culture, I find it interesting. And I'm not speaking for all of black culture, I'm speaking for what I've experienced. We're out of all the other cultures in America that I see, we're the only ones that really prop up the entertainment class. We prop up the athletes, we prop up the actors, the comedians. We don't really prop up the doctors, the lawyers, like, they're not on the forefront of what is considered to be Black culture from what I've experienced, and I find that unfortunate because that business class is the driving class because they've done the work, they've put the time in, they've done it through school, they've done it through entrepreneurship, they've taken the steps necessary to move forward, and I think that that removes a lot of the excuses. But unfortunately, those are things that still sit there because we become victims. And as victims, we can't become survivors. So we stay stuck. And
Mm.
we're just continually juggling these things that are not necessarily there or need to be juggled. It's like you mentioned earlier. Yes, you're black. Yes, I'm black. This is another way of being black. And on top of that, the world's going to react a way to you which is outside of our control because that's that world, that's their experiences. We just have to either deal with it or die by it. you
Yeah.
know, it
Well,
it's kind of the lot in life.
one thing I want to respond to about you saying we prop up our entertainment class, which I never really thought of it that way. I definitely agree that we do prop it up. But if you also think about the business class that is driving forward, is that they often do abandon the culture. It is, it becomes less and less important to do things to support Black culture as you start to find success in business world, and that has a lot to me to do with like authenticity and shaving parts of yourself away to succeed in that world. Like there are going to be things that they're going to tell you are not you're not going to be able to be as loud as you are. You're not going to be able to be so animated. They're going to make you tone down your blackness, and as you start to do that, you start to believe that you're one of them whenever you never will be. You'll never be a white person. You just can't be that. You can be you, and you can be you within that space in a way that doesn't sacrifice yourself. But I think it takes an outside eye to be able to say, hey, here's some ways that you could be able to assimilate into this culture without sacrificing yourself, your authenticity, your blackness specifically. Like those are things that I wish I would have had somebody to say to me is that, you know, I I grew up mostly around white people, and whenever I started to do research into Black culture, and I started to fall in love with rap music, and you know I felt so afraid to actually act Black because it was too late for me. It was like I'd shaved away like all parts of like acting Black, quote unquote, in my mind, that whenever I started to fall in love with those things, I was afraid to actually take part in them because I thought people would judge me. And they would have, but that doesn't matter. Like you should be allowed to just chase the things that you want because you want them. And helping somebody like shirk off those opinions of other people and like love themselves enough to not care is what I strive to do in this world.
See, that's funny. I had the opposite effect. I had the I had to quote unquote act black in order to be accepted in the black community
Mm,
because that is racism. That is a system that's on both sides because you're kind of forced into this single lane
mm,
versus if you want to be a little bit more nerdy, then you're not black. And if you're
mm,
being nerdy, you're being accepted and you're being more white. And if you want to get into rap and you want to do hip hop, you want to dance, you want to whatever it may be, basketball is like a big thing. If you're kind of tall, push them towards basketball.
mm.
If those things are happening and it's happening from both sides, like I struggle with this myself because I wonder how much of that exists and how much of it is internalized because you are black. So how you talk and how you act, regardless of how it is acting black. You know?
Exactly.
Yeah. It's like, I mean, hey, if you, I don't know, played golf and,
I
you
did.
oh,
I
there
did. I
there you
played a lot of
go.
golf and I loved it. I only stopped because I had a back problem, but I used to play like golf every week. And that was another thing where it was like, my own parents would say that they used to say, "Oh, come back," and they used to call me BJ. Come back, BJ. And I'm like, "What do you mean? Like, why don't you come back to the Black people? Come do some Black things." And I'm like, you know what? That hearing that from your own family is so dejecting. It's just it's just really it took a long time to get over that and just to, really get back to loving myself because there's a lot of different ways I was told that I am not worthy of love.
Yeah, and it's usually subtle.
Yeah.
It's usually extremely subtle because it's why you're like I remember getting ready in like junior high for school, and it's like before we had a uniform, it's like, okay, do I wear this shirt that might have like a cartoon on it, or do I wear this shirt that has the FUBU logo on it?
Hmm.
What's going to be easier for me to kind of assimilate into whichever crowd I'm going to be around? Do I wear a shirt that fits me, or do I wear a shirt that's 3X? And
Mhm.
those were things that I struggle with all the time. And then looking back at it now, it's like, oh man, the system, the system was molding me into being a particular character that wasn't true to my authentic self, to borrow
Mhm.
a turn of phrase from you.
I
And
don't own it. I don't own it.
I don't know.
I push it.
And I think it's a great thing to push because, and I think that also happens to white people. I think that happens to Asian people. And it's like if you're a white person and you're associated, you grew up in a black neighborhood, now you're going to do all these extras to show that you're accepted and you're kind of that too.
Mhm.
But you also have the option of going back over to the other side because you can put a suit on and it's like, oh, all right, on to the next one. But I just find it so interesting because once people start to do that, you start to see the humanity that exists in everyone. And
Mhm.
it makes it more difficult for you to want to box somebody in because you understand that you in turn are being boxed in and you don't want them to do that to you. Or
Mhm.
you understand how that feels. So you're like, I'm gonna be a little bit more mindful of the things that I do so that I'm not, you know, putting the pressure on someone else that I don't want applied to me.
Yeah, I think it's really important to understand that there doesn't have to be a box. Like, everybody wants to put everybody in all these specific boxes, but why? Like, why do you feel the need to perform into a box or, ascribe other people to their box? Like, just be you and accept the person who is approaching you. Like, and, you're not going to like everybody. Like, that's ridiculous. Of course, you're not going to like everybody, but give people a chance to show you who they are, not based on their skin color or their gender or what kind of clothes they wear. Have a conversation, and if you don't like the conversation that you have, it's okay to say, hey, this was nice, but I'm going to go ahead and move on to somebody else who has more in common with me, or who challenges me more. I think it's important to find people who challenge you with an amount of respect and certain discourse that it helps you grow. But, if you find that you're talking to people and they're just being assholes all the time, maybe it's time to find a different circle.
Yeah, it's like maybe that's not the direction you need to grow in, you know?
Right,
Yeah.
exactly.
When it for yourself, when it comes to, not just accepting your blackness, but, championing it, what is something that you have been able to do or incorporate in your life that's allowed you to push that message?
It's something that I actively want to be better at, but it's I've we homeschool our kids, and it's something that has been really important in our homeschooling is that we like educate on our history, on the things that have happened in America in our past, and how some of it's been really unfair, but also there have been some like great stories of success and victory that have happened in Black history. So like that's the main way I do it. Then I also just it's a lot of conversations. Like I have a lot of conversations with people whenever they say the thing, whatever the thing is. Like I had a very very deep discussion with my father-in-law a couple weeks back because he said that um, the media doesn't make a big deal about white people being killed by the cops as it does about black people being killed by the cops. And like it was a whole thing. He told me that, this guy getting shot by the cops was the same as George Floyd. And I was like, no, 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 no. And so that led into a deep discourse on race in America and institutional racism and like all these different things. And I'm willing to have the conversations from a place where I'm not pissed off. I can get irritated at times, but it's like I'm very patient. Like I'm extremely patient and I'm willing to like give a lot of space for people who are willing to give me space to have the conversation. Some people just want to tell me how it is to be black whenever they're not black, and that conversation pisses me off a lot. It's like, dude, you have zero idea. You literally cannot even begin to understand. So you telling me that your one black friend told you this does not mean anything. Or you read from Larry Elder or Candace Owens. Like, don't token me. Like I've heard of these people. I know that there are a couple of black people who agree with your opinion, and that's their opinion. They're still black, but that they don't speak for the whole of the of black society.
We're not a
I
monolith,
no, we're not a monolith, but there are shared experiences that most of us can agree to. most of us can say that when the cops pull up behind us, there is a faster heartbeat. Like that's just like fact. I think even Larry Elder would say, "Yeah, I get a little worried whenever the cops pull up behind me." And if he doesn't, he's probably going to get it bad someday. But that's something that I really had to push back with him against because you know, privilege is something that's so deep that it makes it extremely hard to step outside of it to have the perspective of somebody who's really just listening. And I think that this young generation of like 20-year-olds or so, 20 to 25-year-olds of white people is like the first generation where I've been able to see that they're actually like sometimes they're so into like wokeism that they can be like a little extra, but they're actually able to like really listen to other people's experience and empathize and not try to like either feel so guilty that they can't hear it or try to explain it away.
Okay, so I do have one thing I want to ask you because
Yeah.
I think I'm probably in line with your father in terms of what he mentioned in terms of the other guy, and I'll explain to you why. But
Mhm,
I'm also like I believe in homesteading. I'm a
mhm.
bit of a prepper, so that's kind of why. In through the explanation, you kind of see where I'm at with that. For you, what are the differences that you feel that they are, and when it comes to a black person being gunned down, or excuse me, being murdered the way George Floyd was?
So yeah, the way that specific incident was so different was that it was akin to a public lynching. There were, I think, 7 different officers standing around while one person like literally was on the back of his neck while he's telling them that he's dying, that they're killing him. He's saying that I can't breathe. There's, multiple minutes of this happening and they're watching this happen. They're witnessing. It's not like there was a bunch of confusion, a whole bunch going on. There's one person being murdered in the street and they're watching it. The thing that makes it even worse is that they shouldn't have been there in the first place. It was a bounce check. There was a bounce fucking check. The only reason that they were there is because he was a large black man. If he had not been a large black man, the cops never would have been called. And if they would have called, they wouldn't have come because they'd have been like, it's a bounce check. What the lady said was, there's a large black man who did not pay or who's got a bounce, whatever. But that was part of how it was spun. And immediately that's a trigger word. We need to get a couple officers out there. And that is institutionally the same. Like I don't care who you are, when you say large black man, the cops are gonna fucking come in force.
100%. And I think where we actually are going to agree on is that there is a system in people that are in control of said system are allowing shortcuts to be taken. They're allowing
Mm-hmm.
for because it's kind of like there's about 20% of the employees that do 80% of the work and the other 80% are kind of just like fillers. And
Yeah.
I feel like that extends out to like our government employees. I'm really big on watching First Amendment auditors because we are all out here and we're protesting and we're pushing for equal rights. However, the message is able to be spun in a way that it prevents the other from being able to relate. Because when you just say this is only happening to black people, you ignore the fact that it happens to white people, Mexican people, Asian people, and there is more division and it makes it more difficult for a change to actually occur. When we all have constitutional rights that need to be enforced and people need to take a little bit more seriously. So for George Floyd, the reason that that man was murdered was because of bad policing. And that
Mm-hmm.
extends from the police that kneeled on him all the way to the officers that stood there and watched. And the reason why that racism was allowed to exist was because one, they said, large black man, come out here and handle this. Because it was a large black man, it made it more likely to occur.
Mm-hmm.
However, if he was 7'2", 5'1", black, white, brown, or Asian, there should not have been that amount of force applied. And if a person is saying he can't breathe, there are actual rules and regulations in the law force and in the book that tell them they need to call in a paramedic, they need to call an ambulance.
Mm-hmm.
They need to, they can subdue someone and then once they're handcuffed, you can handcuff their feet. You don't need to lean on them anymore.
Mm-hmm.
That's in their book. And I think the fact that that isn't pushed more, the fact that there was a crime committed versus making it specifically a racial crime it prevents our society from actually evolving and moving forward, because then you create the adversarial argument of, well, this is happening to black people, and then you have white people who are in lower income situations who are saying, well, this is happening to us as well. And then instead of these two groups, which would be bigger if they joined together, they become, oh, well, I'm right wing and you're just liberal and you just want everything to be given to you. I have to work my ass off. And it just becomes such a like a back and forth. All lives
I
matter versus Black Lives Matter.
I agree that there's definitely truth in the fact that if everybody were to band together, there'd be more power there. But it's really hard for me to buy into that whenever there's systemic things that happen to black men because they're black that don't happen to white men. If you know, if you have a criminal who has committed a crime, they're going to be treated differently. Now you can say that, well, there is a white guy who did this thing and he went through this, this, and this. That treatment would have been worse for that person if that person had been black. Like, and that's, that's almost universally correct whenever it comes to treatment by the police, is that it is so systemic that the only ways that it has been, eradicated in some departments is by completely disbanding the force that they've had and completely retraining them because it is so deeply systemic. Like that's, I can't remember what the place was. Like it's up in the Northeast somewhere. They had to literally disband their entire police force because the racism had run so deep that they had to start over from scratch. And this was like less than 5 years ago. That is that's wild to me that people can say, well, yeah, I mean, sure that happened, but that's not like a systemic problem. It's like, but these things happen all over you're in California, I'm in Oklahoma, and we both are worried when we get pulled over by the cops for a reason. It's not that we're just paranoid. It's because there is a reason they handle us differently. Like
Oh, yes.
they
Definitely.
just do. And so saying like we're talking about the same thing is we're not talking about the same thing though. The cops are there for one, they're given too much power and they're given too much responsibility. I think that the scope of police force should be narrowed way down. I think the police do a few very important things that are necessary, but I think that they're also supposed to be social workers. They're showing up to mental health calls that they should never fucking be at. Like a cop showing up to a mental health call is, especially whenever there's a black man involved, is asking for gun violence. Like it's just saying like because he's black, so he's intimidating. So whenever he makes a move, we're gonna treat him as if he is an intimidating black man making a move, as opposed to this being somebody who's got a mental health issue, who's struggling, who needs help. They're treating him as somebody who is intimidating. You can't do both. You can't police that situation and also give that person the help that they need. It's impossible. It's,
So, for yourself, do you believe that? Because to me, I believe they definitely handle black men differently,
mm,
including black women, but we're going to focus on black men specifically
yeah.
here. I 100% agree that they handle them differently, but I think that the root of the issue is still because they're bad police officers. Like a good police officer is going to handle you, me, or, some white guy exactly the same. A good
Uh,
police officer.
I will say that I would agree a good police officer would handle that situation that way. But the system is set up as so that good police officers are beat down to the point to where they're no longer good anymore. And
Correct. They
and
either
so that,
leave or they assimilate, like
yeah.
you mentioned.
And so
Yeah,
and so that's the systemic issue is that yes, it is bad policing. Yes, it is bad cops, but those bad cops are created by the system that wants black people to fail. Like they do. They want more black people in prison because since the freeing of the slaves and the enactment of the 13th Amendment, they've needed us to keep working for them. It is so like that's just what we are to them. We're just free labor, and as long as they can keep arresting us and keep putting us in jail, they're going to do it. And when we fight back, or when we I'm sorry, not even fight back, whenever we have um any resistance whatsoever, they're going to make an example of us.
I think they do that to everyone. And I think the reason why they are able to do that to everyone is because we are all so disjointed. And when I say disjointed, I don't mean just black people. I mean people who are not a part of that 2 or 5% of income earners in America. And because our system, and like I'm a big proponent of capitalism, I feel that our system, it creates this false scarcity. So you have people who are afraid of having things taken from them, so they hold other people down. Especially when it comes to like black people. Black people, we have, and it's the same, potential that everyone else has, but because I'm black, I'm going to be biased and say that there's something special there. And it's muted a lot of times because when you do become successful, if you don't toe the line, they're going to shut you down. They're going to spin it, they're going to arrest you, they're going to lock you up, they're going to do all of those things if you don't toe the line. However, those things happen to other races, and because you have a media that focuses on one story versus a wide variety so that they can see that it's a systemic issue versus the created racists like in Remember the Titans or something like that, where you have someone who's screaming N words and saying, I want to stop you specifically because you're black. I think what it is you have a lot of these old boy systems that have these people who are, chiefs, who are sergeants, who are lieutenants. And because the majority of workers are bad workers, they create a toxic environment. They prevent good officers from being able to report or being able to do anything that they're supposed to do along the lines. The system itself becomes, it's all man-made. Like I feel like it's more of individually people that are bad at what they do versus malicious people who are just like, I want to put my boot on a black person's neck. I
Let me
want to
ask a
kill an
question.
N-word.
Let me ask a question of you. How many video, like, I know that you said you're not really a social media person, but hopefully you can speak to this. How many videos have you seen of white men getting pulled over by the police and saying, I know my rights. What did you pull me over for? Like literally raising their voice to police. Have you seen those videos?
Yes,
How many times have you seen a black man post one of those videos?
lots. And the
Really?
reason, yes, and the reason why is because I'm really into First Amendment auditors, or for people who are just auditors in general. They understand and they know their rights and they act accordingly. Like there's a God, auditing while black, um, Bay Area transparency, but he's Latino. There's also Tyrant Terminator audits. These are people who will go into police departments and they record, and people get uncomfortable and they're like, oh, you shouldn't be doing this. But there is a constitutional right that they have.
Now, so whenever I'm talking about not walking into a police station, I'm talking about getting pulled over during an active traffic stop. A black man posting, talking to the cops with a disrespectful attitude.
That as
This
well.
isn't you. I've never seen that. Like I'm
I'll
gonna.
send you some. Like
Yeah,
the reason,
please do.
yeah, and the reason being is because those are auditors then become targeted by police officers.
Mhm.
They get pulled over, they get false charges like ramped up on them all the time because that's somebody that's disturbing the status quo. It
Mhm.
happens a lot, and it's because these people are comfortable in their rights. There's a video I'll send you where there's a black man who comes home after cops had reported to, I think it was a package theft, and this guy's like open carrying, and so the cops are trying to like get on the ground. You're not supposed to have that. He's like, no, no, just straight up no. And everyone's like, no, you need to go inside. Go to. He's like, absolutely not. This is my Second Amendment right. And if I want to say fuck you to your face right now, that's my First Amendment right. So fuck you, pig. And like,
Wow.
that's something that like, there's so much power that we have in these rights as long as we exercise them.
Yeah, I'm not
And
gonna exercise that. I'm not willing to risk that. Yeah, I'd like to see that video though. Like that's an interesting thought to me. And I'm open to the possibility that my view has been skewed by the media, but I do feel very strongly that there is a strong unbalance with the force in which black men are treated by the police compared to everybody else. And
I agree with that.
I
I
mean
agree with that.
that's the base thing that I'm talking about here, and that being a systemic thing. And that systemic thing you're saying is by it being bad cops. I'm saying the system is broken. I think either way, it's both systemic. Even if if it's just a majority of bad cops, that's a bad system. If
I
you're
agree.
if you're allowing the majority of your cops to be bad, that is a fucking terrible system. Any other job, if most of your employees were bad at it, they would fire everybody and they would start over and do different kinds of training, or they'd go out of business. But this job can't go out of business.
They get
They're
more
doing
money.
exactly, they're doing a
Yeah.
disservice to their public, and they can't get put out of business. And I think that it's really messed up.
Yeah, I mean, there was even a Supreme Court ruling that, at least I know in California, they don't have it anymore. Protect and serve isn't on police vehicles anymore because
Mm,
they are not obligated to protect and serve you.
mm,
It's like there is a systemic issue. I agree that 1 billion% it's systemic. However, if the way the laws, the way the system is written, if people were held responsible and they had to abide by that, you'd run into a lot less of these police murders, because literally a cop can, violate your rights and then still claim qualified immunity. Where if you work at McDonald's, someone rude is rude to you, they spit in your face. If you throw the drink on them, you're gonna get fired.
mhm.
At fucking McDonald's, you don't get
Yeah.
to carry a gun. You can't lock someone up. You can't alter the course of someone's life. You just flip fucking burgers, and you will get
Mhm,
fired for giving the same energy that someone gave to you. When
mhm.
you could be a police officer and murder someone and get away with it.
Yeah.
Like that I agree. It's 100% systemic. I just got a text from my wife. I need to help the little guy. So we'll wrap up here. But one thing I actually would like to do, if you're up for it,
Yeah.
I've interviewed a couple of other, black people, and I'd love to kind of get a panel going to discuss this, because
Sure.
there's a lot of different ideas. Like I'm a conservative. Like
Mhm.
I'm a I'm like I got an American hat on. I wear flannels and shit all day. Like I'm
I wear
conservative.
flannels too, but I would say I'm more of a libertarian than anything. But I also just I think that the two party system is bullshit. So like that's it to me goes to the conversation that we were having about everything else today. Why force people into boxes that don't need to exist? Like I think that the conservative liberal thing is bullshit because I think some conservative things are very they're wise. Like I want less government interference in my life. That I would
Yes,
love that. But also I want to help people who are struggling. I don't think you should have to choose one or the other.
I agree. I mean, yes, I agree with you 100%.
But
And I
no,
would
I'd
have
love
to
to be
say
part of
I'm
the
more of a
panel.
libertarian myself. I'd
Yeah.
have to say I'm more of a libertarian myself. And I think it would be a good mix, because I have a couple of younger, black people that I've interviewed, and then you and myself were in the same age group, and then I have a couple older black people that I've interviewed, and I think it could be something that is special. I mean, I think it could be something
Yeah, that
that's
sounds
discussed
fun.
among, yeah, like I'm actually really looking forward to it. So
Yeah.
I mean, before we get out of here, I want to make sure that we get you to plug any and everything. How do people find you? How do they get you? I'll also have you email me a list of all your links and socials, so that way I can post it with the video, so that when people see this, they're gonna be interested. It's like it's gonna be kind of hard not to be.
Well, yeah, first off, thank you for the conversation. Like what I've found through this, this authentic journey of mine is that the amount of deep, engaging conversation that I've had has been enormous. Like it is the level that I'm connecting with people is it's on the next level because I stopped trying to show up as some different person who doesn't exist. And it's hard to have anything past the surface level whenever you're doing that because you're trying to like cobble together some personality based off of like the ether, and it's really hard to do that. So what I've found is that I've stepped into my authenticity. I've just found that people are so much more interesting whenever you're willing to talk about who you really are, because you're more interesting, they're more interesting. It's like people, you just start talking about everything and it's fun. Like so that's that's something that I just wanted to say first, so thank you for that. um First off, let me talk about my podcast. My podcast is kind of open format like this one where we I ask questions and let people talk, but it's much more centered on authenticity and talking about how you struggled with that. You'd be surprised how long you can talk about the different struggles of trying to show up as yourself and the things that affect that. Like we are shows are about this long generally, and it's it's very interesting conversations. I the one that just aired today is called Black Men Don't Do Yoga, and it's a very good conversation with a friend of mine from high school who is actively left America. He doesn't live here anymore because he could not handle the different pressures being put on him as a black man. Like it was too much for him. He'd been in the military. He had to like he'd lived other places and seen that the way black men are treated here is not normal. Like it's just not normal. He's like, I've seen it. I've seen the promised land. I'm getting the fuck out of here. Like, and and to me, like that was, it like, blew my mind. It felt like, he'd left the Matrix, and like I'm still sitting here, like, really, like there's somewhere else to go. Like there's enough to keep me here. Absolutely, that I don't want to go, but I really respected that conversation, and it was a really challenging perspective. So that's Black Men Don't Do Yoga. That is on Authentic on Air with Bruce Alexander. You can find me on Podbean, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, on everything that I know of. Listen Notes. I try to put it out there for everybody to be able to find. You can find me on social media on LinkedIn and Facebook as Bruce Alexander. That's my personal, or my business page is Authentic Identity Management, and that's on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook. And then you can also check out my YouTube videos where I've got podcast clips and full podcast videos, and that's Authentic Bruce YouTube channel. And if you are interested in my services, you can check out my website, which is AuthenticIdentityManagement.com, or Be Authentic at Webflow.io. And that's how you can get in touch with me. You can also email me. I'll make sure he has it in the show notes. That is Bruce at AuthenticIdentityManagement.com. I'm actively accepting new clients and looking forward to connecting with some people out there, because if they're fans of shows like this, they're the kind of people I want to work with, because they're already listening to the kinds of information that I want to help people tap more into.
I would agree wholeheartedly. I will say this, Bruce. I'm a black guy that does yoga. So definitely put it out there that black guys do yoga.
Yeah,
That's a big thing.
it was definitely a clickbait title, is because he is actually a comedic yoga practitioner. He teaches it. Right now he's just coming back from Costa Rica, where he put on a retreat for a couple dozen different people teaching yoga, and he's in Tulsa, Oklahoma, working with some high profile rich person who flew him in, had to offer him a lot of money to bring him back to America to come into Oklahoma to work with them personally for a month to get their mental wellness in line. I was super cool.
That is actually really cool.
Yeah.
I'm not that I do yoga just to make sure I'm a little pliable. Well, I'm
No,
not on that level.
he is full into it. And he is, listening to him talk, you can tell that he's one of those people who have really found that inner peace of not really caring about what the world has to say about him. And he has been a person that I've followed for a while, and I was really excited to talk to him, because he's shaped part of my journey to be myself, because he's always, not always, but he's actively been open about that journey himself. And so, yeah, I think it's a good episode, and I think that people should listen to it.
I would agree. I'm actually going to be one of those people. I'm going to check that out. I mean, that was a great plug, because you've got me interested. So yeah,
Yes.
that's going to be when I'm in the sauna and I hit the the exercise bike. That's what I'm going to be listening to tonight. I'm looking forward to it.
And it was good to get to know you, man. I'm looking forward to the panel information. Yeah, set me up.
Agreed. Agreed. I think this is going to be something that's going to be mutually beneficial for everyone involved, and then anyone that watches, because, like you mentioned, there is this kind of either or when it comes to being black or not being black or considered black. And I
Mhm.
think showing multiple, eyeballs, or not even eyeballs, just multiple perspectives. And these are all black men that are going to be on this panel. And it would be impossible for anyone to say that we're not black, because it's 100% what we are,
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
yeah.
I'll
Oh,
be
this was
disappointed if somebody does say it though. That would suck. It's oh
well,
man, one of you guys, come on.
someone will. Someone
Uh-huh.
will. It'll come out there, because we've all had to deal with that struggle of proving
Yeah.
our blackness, or even our maleness, or our
Mhm.
masculinity. So I really appreciate having you as a guest. Everyone out there, make sure that you check Bruce out. Bruce not only gave us a good conversation today, but like I mentioned before, I've done some thumbing through his website, through some of his socials, and he actually walks what he talks. So if you're someone that's out there that's struggling with a little bit of personal and self identity, then I recommend reaching out to Bruce, because it's going to be something that'll help promote you in your life and get you to a better position, at least to where you can accept where you're at. And if you want something more, you can go ahead and have a base to actually spring from.
Yeah.
So, Bruce, again, thank you so much from myself here over here at Civil Rhetoric. We appreciate having you as a guest. And I'm actually going to go ahead and loop you in. I'll send out an email to you and the other members I'd love to have on this panel, because this is something I'd like to put together soon.
All right, man. Yeah, let's do it. All right.
All right. Sounds good. Bruce, you enjoy the rest of your evening.
You do the
Enjoy
same. Take
those
care of that
4
baby.
kids. Oh yeah, it's funny because I'm in the basement. I'm not sure if you can hear him, but I can hear my wife like rolling him around on the stroller right now. So it's time to get that walk in.
Oh man, it gets. I'm not gonna say it gets easier. It gets different.
Yeah, I have friends, like, I'm the last one to have kids because that was something I'm selfish. Like, I'm
Yeah.
100% selfish. So I was like, kids are all about self-sacrifice.
Mm.
And now that I'm actually here, like, I'm enjoying the moments while I can, because I understand that there's gonna be a time when he doesn't think I'm cool. And right now, I
Mhm.
want him to be like, "Man, my dad's the greatest." Even though
Yeah.
he can't talk or do anything. I just want
Yeah.
him to look at him in his eyes and give me that good love.
Yeah. All right, man. Have a good one.
All right, you do the same. It was wonderful speaking with you.